Long before pharmacies, before supplements, before anyone knew what a probiotic was, people were already taking care of their bodies in ways we're only now starting to understand. And the strangest part, they were doing it with food that had gone slightly sour, soured, aged, left for weeks in clay jars, buried under the earth. But this wasn't spoilage. This was something the ancients practiced without fully knowing why. The same foods mentioned in scripture, carried through deserts and stored in the jars of kings, are now being explored by modern researchers. And what they're finding is changing how some people look at traditional foods. 10 foods, each one older than most civilizations, each one tied to a story in scripture, a tradition, or a forgotten ritual. And by the time we reach number 3, you may understand why monks, prophets, and desert travelers were often known for their long lives. Let's begin. Number 10, sourdough bread. Not the kind wrapped in plastic at the supermarket, the real kind. The kind Abraham may have broken with strangers. The kind baked on hot stones in the hills of Galilee. Ancient bread was different. No factory yeast, just wild fermentation. Flour and water, left to breathe, catching microbes from the open air. That slow process did something interesting. It broke down some of the gluten. It also reduced something called phytic acid, a compound that can make minerals harder for the body to absorb. So while modern bread may sit heavy for some people, traditional sourdough behaves differently. Here's the part most people miss. Some studies suggest that slow fermented sourdough may be tolerated better by people who feel sensitive to regular bread. The bacteria seem to do some of the work before the bread ever reached the table. The bread of the Bible wasn't just food, it was something deeper. Number 9, olives. Everyone knows the olive tree. It appears in scripture more than almost any other plant. A dove brought an olive branch to Noah. The Mount of Olives watched over Jerusalem. Kings were anointed with its oil. But raw olives, you can't eat them. They're bitter beyond belief. So the ancients did something clever. They soaked them in salt water for weeks. The bitterness faded. The fruit softened. And a quiet world of bacteria slowly developed inside the brine. That brine, by the way, was often consumed as a traditional tonic. Fermented olives contain strains of lactobacillus that some studies have associated with gut comfort. They also carry polyphenols, compounds that researchers have explored for their possible role in supporting everyday well-being. And here's where it gets interesting. Some of the oldest olive jars ever discovered, sealed for thousands of years, still contain traces of living cultures when opened. The bacteria were dormant, but not gone. Now pause for a second. Think about that. A jar sealed before your great-great-grandfather was born, still holding life inside. Number 8, honey and honeycomb. Now, this one surprises people. Raw, unfiltered honey, the kind John the Baptist ate in the wilderness, contains enzymes, wild yeasts, and natural compounds that behave differently than the honey on store shelves. Ancient Israelites called their land one flowing with milk and honey. They weren't talking about dessert. They were talking about survival. Raw honey was placed on wounds, given to the weak, fed to newborns. Researchers have explored the compounds inside it, including hydrogen peroxide, bee enzymes, and trace pollen, and have found that some of these may have natural antibacterial properties. Modern processed honey, heated and filtered, loses much of this. But here's the detail that stops most people. Archaeologists opening sealed Egyptian tombs have found jars of honey over 3,000 years old, still edible. Very few natural foods share this kind of lasting quality. And imagine this for a moment. A food your ancestors tasted, a food prophets tasted, still sitting unchanged in the ground for 3,000 years. Number 7. Fermented fish. Before you turn away, listen. In the ancient world, from the shores of Galilee to the rivers of Egypt, fermented fish was a daily staple. The Romans called theirs garum. The Israelites had their own versions. In those days, fish was often preserved through salting and slow fermentation. Why does this matter? Because fermented fish carries something many modern diets don't include: vitamin K2, B vitamins in an absorbable form, omega-3s the body handles well, and a group of bacteria that researchers are still exploring today. The fishermen of the New Testament weren't eating fresh fillets off a plate, they were eating preserved fish. Their traditional diet reflected a variety that modern populations seem to have moved away from. But here's what few people talk about. And some researchers have explored possible connections between the loss of traditional fermented foods and the digestive patterns seen today. It's still an emerging area of study. Still watching? Good, because the next one is closer to your fridge than you think. Number 6, yogurt and cultured milk. The Bible mentions curdled milk long before anyone had a word for yogurt. Abraham served it to visiting strangers. Nomadic tribes carried milk in animal skin pouches across the desert. The heat and the natural bacteria slowly transformed it. Thicker, tangier, longer lasting. They didn't know they were creating probiotics. They just knew the milk didn't turn the same way. Traditional yogurt, made the old way, is believed to contain many bacterial strains, not the 2 or 3 you find on a label in the supermarket. As some traditional diets rich in cultured milk have been associated with balanced digestion, especially in regions where clean water was scarce. Maybe you've felt it yourself. That heavy, uncomfortable feeling after a regular meal. The bloating that just sits there. Ancient peoples rarely spoke of this. They lived on living food. And the reason may be simpler than we think. If you're still watching, you're about to hear something most people never will. Because the next 4 foods weren't just old. They were considered sacred. Number 5, pickled cucumbers and brined vegetables. Long before refrigeration, one of the main ways to survive winter was fermentation. Cucumbers, cabbage, carrots, radishes, all submerged in salt water, sealed in clay, and left alone for weeks. What came out was sour, crisp, and full of living cultures. Here's a strange moment from scripture. The Israelites in the wilderness actually complained about missing the cucumbers of Egypt. It's written directly. And those weren't fresh cucumbers. In that climate, they were almost always brined. Now this is where it gets interesting. Fermented vegetables contain bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids inside the colon. Some studies suggest these compounds may support the cells lining the gut. Emerging research has also explored how a balanced gut may be associated with overall well-being. Traditionally, a single spoonful of fermented vegetables was thought to carry more living cultures than many modern products offer today. Something to think about the next time you walk past the supplement aisle. Before we reach the top 4, think about this. Every food we've mentioned has one thing in common: time, patience, a willingness to let nature do its work slowly. The modern world has moved away from waiting. Number 4, vinegar, specifically raw apple cider vinegar. the kind with the cloudy strands floating at the bottom. Vinegar appears throughout Scripture. Ruth dipped her bread in it. Roman soldiers drank it mixed with water. It was both a daily drink and a poor man's wine. But vinegar, made the old way, isn't just sour liquid. It's the end of a double fermentation. First, sugars become alcohol. Then alcohol becomes acetic acid. And riding that process is a living culture called the mother. That cloudy substance at the bottom of the bottle is where the tradition points. Raw vinegar has been studied for its possible role in supporting digestion and helping the body manage everyday blood sugar responses. Some research suggests that stomach acid levels in modern people may differ from those of earlier generations, which could be one reason simple foods feel harder to digest for some. Traditionally, some people took a small amount before meals. It's a practice that's been around for centuries. Number 4 is still used today in households across the Middle East, almost exactly the way it was 2,000 years ago. But even this doesn't compare to what's coming at number 3. Number 3, fermented grains and ancient drink. This one always surprises people. In ancient Egypt, Israel, and Mesopotamia, a thick fermented grain drink was part of daily life. It wasn't the drink you know today. It was closer to a sour, grainy porridge. Heavy, cloudy, full of natural yeasts. Workers who built great structures were sometimes paid in it. Mothers gave it to children. It was often considered safer than river water because the fermentation process handled many harmful microbes, and it introduced the body to a range of microbes most modern stomachs have never encountered. Some scholars believe the bread and drink mentioned throughout Scripture referred to exactly this kind of living food, not the white bread and sugary drinks we know today. Ancient peoples were quietly consuming living cultures with every meal. They didn't have the word probiotic. They just had the experience. Now imagine consuming something like this every day, from childhood to old age. Your inner world may look nothing like the average person's today. At number 2, lentils and soaked legumes. Jacob traded a birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. It's one of the most famous meals in Scripture. But most people don't realize this. In the ancient world, lentils were almost always soaked, sometimes lightly fermented, before cooking. Why? Because raw legumes contain compounds that can make minerals harder to absorb and digestion less comfortable. Soaking them for a day, sometimes with a splash of vinegar or whey, softened those compounds. It made the lentils easier on the stomach. It released nutrients that might otherwise pass through untouched. This simple step, practiced for thousands of years, is almost completely forgotten in modern kitchens. Many people today feel bloated after eating beans. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. But traditionally, the legumes were rarely eaten without preparation. They were soaked, softened, transformed. One small step, a very different experience. Number 1, and this one is the most overlooked of all, fermented grape products. Traditional grape drinks, verjuice, and grape vinegar. The grapevine is one of the most mentioned plants in the entire Bible. Jesus called himself the true vine. Grape drinks were poured out in sacred ceremonies, used to cleanse wounds, given to the weak. But ancient grape drinks were nothing like what sits on store shelves today. They were unfiltered, lightly fermented, rich with natural yeasts and polyphenols drawn from the skin of the fruit itself, often mixed with water and sipped throughout the day. Here's where it gets fascinating. Some emerging research has explored compounds in traditional, naturally fermented grape products and their possible associations with regions where people are known to live unusually long lives, similar compounds show up again and again in the diets of communities that reach past 100. There's a reason the grapevine became a symbol of life itself across the ancient world. They understood something we may be slowly starting to rediscover. 10 foods, older than empires, simpler than anything sold today, quietly part of traditions that lasted for thousands of years. The ancients didn't have laboratories. They had patience. They had tradition. They had a trust in slow, living food that much of our world has moved away from. We trade that wisdom for convenience. And many people wonder why something feels missing. Maybe wellness was never meant to come from a bottle. Maybe it was meant to come from a jar, a clay pot, a piece of bread broken at a table with strangers. The wisdom is still there, buried in old books, waiting in old recipes. The question is whether we're willing to return to it. If this opened your eyes to something new, take a moment to subscribe. There are more ancient foods, more forgotten plants, and more hidden wisdom still to uncover. And the next video might change the way you look at your next meal. Reminder, this video is for educational and historical interest only. It is not medical advice. Always speak with a qualified professional about your health.